awesome. You just started the new SmartCash podcast, episode 1.
Well, let's just keep this moving forward. Today you have here Zaphoid, or Chris Karabats, me. You have Mark. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Mark.
Hello, I'm Mark from the Outreach team.
And we have Derrick here. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Derrick.
Hey everyone, this is Derrick. I'm also with Outreach.
Awesome. Now, we all have our individual areas of specialties, but we're going to talk briefly about recent happenings in the SmartCash world and see where this takes us. This is just episode 1, as we said, so I'm sure it'll be rough, but hopefully you'll bear with us and we'll just get better. One of the first topics I wanted to cover today would be scaling and some of the recent network tests that have affected a lot of our SmartNode holders. Maybe Mark can get us kicked off on that topic and I can jump in as needed.
Yeah, so lately in the crypto space, there's been a lot of talk about how blockchains can scale up to handle more transactions per second to really encourage mass adoption in the real world. And this is something that SmartCash has been focused on. And the last week or two, you guys have been pushing some stress tests across the network to raise the transactions per second. And I noticed a lot of people are sort of asking questions like, why are we doing this? What's the purpose?
Yeah, and that's a big thing for us because we want to be used as cash, and we can't really be used as cash if we can't push forward enough transactions. So we ended up just pushing a lot of transactions, trying to fill up 4 meg blocks and seeing how the network handled that, how the blocks were distributed across various nodes, and how the transactions were distributed in the mempool. We added a mempool tracking in the smart stats to CC, so anybody can go there and see some older movement there and see how big the mempool was and see how big the transaction count was. Yeah. But we were able to spit out 150,000 transactions or so in about 15 minutes, and that
sounds like a lot.
Yeah, that was a lot. That's more than any other Bitcoin-style blockchain candle. The goal here was to see what we could do, see where areas of improvement could be, and just see how good we could do right now.
Right. So how many transactions per second was that at the peak?
At roughly? The peak, about 380.
That sounds high. I think what Bitcoin SegWit was 20 per second?
Yeah, about 20 per second.
Okay. And with those transactions, so they're in the mempool and they distribute through the node network, which is something like 11,000 active nodes and 55-second block time. So everyone in the network within a minute has all those transactions locked in? Is that?
Yeah, just about. And that is the issue with Bitcoin style network. The transaction mempool and the blocks can't just get distributed fast enough. So we were finding that at 380, that was really pushing it through monitoring of the nodes, and that our realistic sustained TPS is more like 100.
Okay, 100 still sounds pretty quick. So in 1 minute, that's 6,000 transactions?
Yeah, just about.
Okay.
So that's a good number. We're not sad about that number. It's a good starting point.
So, and that's scaling just with 4 megabyte blocks. And in the roadmap, I saw there was adjustable block sizes.
Yeah, we want to have boundless block sizes for upward limit, but we need to optimize how those blocks are distributed across the network and how the mempool is distributed across the network. Because as it is right now, you will end up it doesn't matter if we have unlimited block size when you can't really push much faster. Yeah, now, the other thing that we noticed is that these types of transactions are one in, one out. So what that means is that you have one input, one output. So your input exactly matched what the output was plus the fee. These are not very realistic.
Would it be very different with, say, have 10 transactions mixed together that do one output? That might be more realistic. Would that slow it down then because you have more inputs coming in?
Well, actually, it's the processing transactions that slows things down. So we found it didn't really matter how big the individual transactions are. It really matters how many there are. So if we have huge transactions, so one input, 1,000 outputs, you can get about 300 of those in a 4 meg block. And that doesn't really slow the network down at all. It's really about number of transactions, because it has to validate all those inputs and make sure that the next block actually looks good. So it's really the validating and processing everything.
And that's the validation that's calculating one of those hashes, right? From
that's
the
both
elliptic curve algorithm.
Yeah, that's the calculating the hashes and validating that the transactions that are in the last block you saw are taken out of your mempool, so you don't try to send it in the next block.
Gotcha. So do you guys have you looked at what those like results, and you have some ideas like how you could optimize the code at the node level?
The developers are looking into that, and they have some really good ideas, but a lot of testing on the test net is needed because this is touching very low level stuff. So we'll have to see how that goes over the next 6 months to a year.
Okay.
This is really looking like it's not going to show up until version 1.4 and version 1.5.
Okay. So for version 1.4 and 1.5, it sounds like scaling is one of the goals. And from what you're describing, this is all on-chain scaling, no side channels.
Correct. We are pushing for on-chain scaling. We're not looking for second or third layer solutions. Not to say there won't be in the distant time frame, but our focus right now is on getting the most out of layer one and most out of the blockchain. So all of these transactions are fully trustable. So it's not like you're dealing with a settlement layer like Lightning or something. You're dealing with the blockchain itself.
Awesome. That sounds good. Derrick, have you seen in like your outreach work, is on-chain versus off-chain an issue that comes up with other projects or at events? Do people really think about that as something that's important for like crypto to be like true crypto?
Yeah, I definitely think that, the events I attend kind of run the gamut of people who are the hardcore crypto, people who enthusiasts who are going to argue about, every possible solution one way or the other when it comes to scaling. And then those who are kind of maybe a little bit more ignorant to these conversations, but generally just want to know that the crypto is going to operate, the way they expect it to. And, they're not so, I guess, tied up to which solution. But I do see more people pushing for the idea of what it sounds like SmartCash is what we're doing here, which is on-chain solutions as opposed to layering other solutions on top and things like that.
Okay, that's good to know. So sometimes they're a little agnostic about like how it actually works under the layers or under the skin of the code, and some people are more like, hey, let's do on-chain. That's the true vision. I've heard that come up before.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, good. So we talked about that. Should we talk a little bit about future launches like 1.3, 1.4, where sort of scaling and different approaches to scaling? So not necessarily just transactions and memory pool, but maybe there's some other aspects that are on the roadmap for 2019.
1.3 is something you've talked a lot about with the voting and stuff. So why don't you introduce what's happening there, even though it really doesn't have anything to do with scaling?
Well, yeah, it's important because that's like a stepwise. So 1.3 is the next release, trying to get it available by the end of the year. Probably not going to be fully implemented with like the activation of the spork until I'm guessing January, but these are just guessing the numbers. We'll see what happens. But there's two things that it will launch. One is improved SmartRewards, which is focused around an opt-in approach to SmartRewards. So instead of the current system where every address is eligible until they transact out, it would be everyone has to first opt in through some action, which is going to be a simple thing in the interface, just one click, it's done. And secondary to that, it's going to be a 90-day cycle instead of a 30-day cycle. So the whole holding period will be a little easier on the mind. You don't have to keep worrying every month what you're going to do. And then the second thing with that, it will also be more on-chain voting. So right now, voting is using a third-party site. It's run by the Smart Hive, but it's not fully recorded on the SmartCash blockchain. And I've heard that to help facilitate this opt-in smart rewards, the voting will actually have a kind of a voting key that's generated and used. And this should support paper wallets, which before weren't really able to vote. You have to generate a signed transaction, and that just wasn't possible without a hot active wallet. So those are things I've seen with the 1.3, which is sort of just cleaning up, making things more on-chain, making things more compatible with some of the larger legal structures in the world. And I see that's going to be a positive influence in terms of sort of the return in terms of SmartCash rewards, because there's going to be some wallet addresses out there that aren't going to be voting. They're not going to be active. So then they used to get rewards, and now they won't be getting any rewards because they're not being an active participant. So those who are active should be getting a little bit more rewards. And then the voting is actually voting on the proposals. So that should encourage people to take a look at what's coming into the SmartCash project treasury proposal system and maybe engage a little bit more, which I think long-term will really help with the community.
Yeah, both of those are great things. And just to touch a little bit more on the voting process and the keys, the goal is to move everything on chain, as you said, so it's much easier to track, much easier to look back and see what happened and use our blockchain for our governance process. And we think that a lot of people will like that. It's, some people won't care at all, but I think other people who are definitely in this for philosophical reasons will appreciate that. And as usual, we're going to keep our one smart equals one vote system, which is unique in the space right now. And that will continue on even with the on-chain stuff where other coins don't have that. And then the transaction stuff does actually affect this a bit because the votes and stuff will go through over network. So optimizing that will help optimizing the voting process.
Oh, interesting. So will voting on the network, will that actually be a transaction that'll show up on the blockchain?
No, the voting itself will be using our SmartNode network to track. And the proposals will be on-chain and will be transactions. Now, the voting keys you talked about will actually involve a transaction where you're basically saying, I am at this address, I'm signing this message to the network authorizing this voting key to vote for me.
Okay, so it's registering it.
Yeah, and that's how the process is working right now. We're going through a lot of testing. In fact, the final feature set of testing should be starting in the next couple of days here.
Okay, great. So this sounds like there'll be some benefits, like being able to see how many active voting keys there are just by looking at the blockchain.
Yeah, you should be able to see that because, again, since the smart rewards require that you vote, being able to track back from the voting key to the original address is something that will certainly be possible. And so you'll be able to actually watch that pretty easily on the chain with the right tools. And we'll probably add some more stuff to Smart Stats to make that more fun for people.
Hey, Chris, I just want to ask, how does this change, or does it change anything for the user, anybody who's holding SmartCash and voting in the future? Are these changes going to affect their user experience in any way?
Well, there's going to be there will be some changes. Like right now, if you have a paper wallet, you can't really vote because you have to import that wallet to your computer and sign a message with that private key to actually do the voting. Where in the future, you'll be able to make a paper wallet, and as you're making that wallet, make a separate voting key and just import that key into one of our clients, and the funds on your paper wallet stay safely off system. So that'll allow for people who have other ways of storing their SmartCash and not wanting to touch their day-to-day computer with their funds, they can actually participate in voting without risking their funds or inconveniencing themselves to go get their funds out of cold storage.
That's really cool.
That's cool.
Yeah, it sounds like a cold voting key, which is like great double security.
Yeah, so we're excited about that. We think it's going to work pretty well because we know that a lot of people like the paper wallets, and especially with SmartRewards, you can just make your paper wallet, leave it there, and take advantage of those smart rewards. Whereas if voting was required, that would be very hard unless we had some way to abstract the voting signing away from the key that you're securely storing. So this was a large priority of ours as we were going through implementing this.
Yeah, that's great. That sounds like the needs of the community are really driving some of those design decisions.
Absolutely. And this change in voting is more than just giving smart rewards to the people who are actually participating. It does add the advantage of any abandoned or lost addresses do not get rewards, which ends up making things better for people who are actively participating. And the other change is that smart nodes no longer get rewards as well. So that's sort of separating the smart nodes from the smart rewards, and we'll adjust the gamification of that a little bit so people will have to do some more math when this is done here.
Yeah. In some ways, it's almost less math because I've seen people who go to third-party sites to calculate out their estimated rewards, and those sites don't take into account smart rewards. So they had to do like a second level calculation. So in the future, you won't have to do that. It'll sync up with those third-party site estimated rewards for node running.
Yeah, I do spend a lot of time in Discord, and for a while that was just the question, like, why are all these sites wrong? I'm like, well, it's just different, and for a time they just couldn't track us anyway because we keep doing things differently and uniquely. Like, we're the only nodes out there. They're going to pay you 5 nodes every block, or 10
Right,
nodes every
yeah.
block more exactly, and that really screwed with some of them. And so the smart rewards was just a little bit too far for them to track of, and they just gave up on that. So yeah, this is
Okay.
one of those things where on a marketing side of things, everything's just more straightforward. This is what smart nodes get. This is what smart rewards are. You don't need to correct people or say, actually this or whatever. It's just very straightforward and helpful on that side of things.
Okay, yeah, I've heard this is like thinking of it as three different sort of ways to engage with network. It's the smart rewards, holding, sort of participating that way. The
Hmm.
second level is running a smart node, which they run the instant transaction verification and also like full node to share the blockchain,
Hmm.
like what you were talking about with the TPS. And then, so I've seen, so with 1.4, I think it's the SuperNodes. That's another layer of interaction, which will have higher collateral, but also a different purpose. And that purpose, what I've heard is also that some sort of, it's related to scaling, but a different type of scaling. Uh, Maybe you could get into a little bit about the purpose of smart supernodes, or maybe a little bit about 1.4 scaling goals at large. So whatever seems to work better, I think it'd be great to hear about.
Yeah, super nodes are a rather unique in our landscape. There's only a couple. A lot of people think it's just going to be like a scaled node, like, oh no, you just need a higher collateral, it does the same thing. Where that's not the purpose at all. We're not just about wasting time here. The purpose of the super nodes is to host Electrum servers, which allows the Electrum wallet to function, as well as hosting the API for the smart card.
Yeah, so I have a question. So the Electrum nodes, is that the
Mhm.
same thing as SPV nodes, the simplified payment verification nodes?
Electrum nodes are a SPV type.
Okay.
That's the only SPV type we've implemented in SmartCash so far, but it is just one of the SPVs.
Okay, so I was recently rereading Satoshi's white paper because it was the
Mhm.
anniversary and all, and he actually mentions SPV in that. So it sounds like SmartCash is also further implementing some of these original ideas, but in a decentralized manner. So if super nodes are running SPV and they're incentivized, that means SPV is going to be a core part of SmartCash in the future.
Yes, and it's very important for us to allow that because not everybody has the ability to run a full node. I mean, you're not going to run a full node on your phone. You're not going to run a full node on your Raspberry Pi or your mini computer that's sitting in a vending machine somewhere. Those systems will need to be able to access SPV servers so they can still validate the transactions, but they don't need to keep a full copy of the blockchain. And so this is important, and we're incentivizing and decentralizing it so that community members have the ability to host these themselves and are incentivized to do so in a good and reliable way. So they'll
So
be
that's an approach to scaling sort of horizontally then, instead of like fully on-chain transaction pools. This is making the second layer of like these smaller devices, light wallets, Internet of Things, be able to trustfully interact with smart cash.
yes, that actually is. It's a good way of putting it because it's not really a second layer in like the Lightning a second layer. It's second layer in making it easier for people to access the first layer in a reliable and trusted way.
Okay, that sounds actually pretty cool. So that will help more devices interact with the SmartCash network.
Yeah, and not just help more devices, but help more devices interact with networks with physical locations, hopefully closer to where they are, and also improve censorship resistance, because there's not going to be single authorities out there running these things. There's not only going to be like 10 or 20 of them out there. There's going to be we hope hundreds, over 100, maybe 200 of them out there. And we're using a smaller number like that simply because these are supposed to be high collateral requirements and high system performance. So these are supposed to be very good systems out there, not your $5 VPS like runs the SmartNodes.
Okay, yeah. So it sounds like it connects even to the point of sale terminals, which would be running the smart card too. And SPV maybe interacts with smart card API, or are they just completely separate and the smart card API will just be another thing on that server?
The smart card API does interact with the Electrum SPVs to help validate the transactions as they come through.
Okay.
Are we too early in the year, or is it, we're not ready yet to quite reflect on 2018? I heard Chris, you saying about the 2019 roadmap and kind of looking forward. Have we taken a moment to look back at everything that SmartCash was able to fulfill?
Oh, that would probably be an excellent topic for our next podcast, I think, or one of the ones right at the end of the year. We'll do like a New Year's Eve party 28 reflection or something. And
sounds good.
That would be a really good idea, because if we go into that, we'll be here for another half hour.
Right.
We have a lot to celebrate. Right?
Yeah, I think
absolutely.
Just one line takeaway is like SmartCash made products first, and they launched the smart card rather than making like a fancy white paper. So ICOs who only did white papers didn't make a product, and they're now out of business. Smart card actually self-funded and made a product, and later kind of made a brochure / white paper thing. So they're actually getting stuff done.
Yeah, and that is another point. No reason to use a bunch of flowery language to describe the base thing that everybody else has already done. We're focused on actually doing stuff.
Good. Is 1.5 too far away, or is that on? I think that's too far in the future.
That's too far. I mean, 1.5 will really depend on what ends up in 1.4. And we do have a lot of scaling stuff planned for 1.4, but we also have the SuperNodes planned. So we'll have to see what ends up in 1.4 and what gets relegated to 1.5.
Yeah. At that point, all the substantial network infrastructure will be incentivized and decentralized and censorship resistant, which sounds like for any blockchain project to really be successful, it needs to get those three things perfect.
Yeah, and last thing you want is to have, 2 Electrum servers out there that any government can just say, well, we'll just block those IP addresses and bam, you're done. So the goal here is to have something that's not reliant on any single point of failure. And we feel that the SuperNodes accomplish that for our very important infrastructures of the Electrum servers and the smart card APIs.
I hope that's right. I hope we see that play out in action. I believe in what we're doing here. Like where you're talking here about the importance of, like we were saying, Mark, something that can be censorship free and decentralized. And I mean, I think it's becoming increasingly important. People are realizing why something like what SmartCash is pushing for is necessary.
Yeah, I mean, I'll use my line that I've used too many times of, we're trying to put currency back in cryptocurrency. Our focus is on creating a usable currency that can be used easily, cheaply, and by anybody.
Yeah, that makes sense though, because transactions is the number one use of a blockchain. People use it every day. People use money every day. So it makes sense to focus on that and make it scalable to serve the whole world.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good.
I think we're pretty good for the first one here. So this was episode 1 of the SmartCash podcast, and we will catch you all next time.